The evening sun cast long shadows through the apartment windows as Marcus Jensen stood in the living room, his suitcase packed beside him. His wife Sarah sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The home they had built together over 3 years of marriage suddenly felt suffocating to him. "I just need space," Marcus said, his voice steady but distant. "We've grown apart, Sarah. I don't feel the same way anymore." He avoided meeting her eyes, knowing the pain he would find there. His hand instinctively reached for his phone, where messages from Rebecca waited. Sarah clutched a throw pillow to her chest, her knuckles white from gripping it too hard. "Is there someone else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Marcus flinched but quickly composed himself. "No," he lied, thinking of Rebecca, his coworker from the marketing department. They had been seeing each other for the past 4 months, stealing moments during lunch breaks and after-work meetings. The guilt gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. Their apartment, once filled with laughter and dreams, now felt like a museum of broken promises. Photos of their honeymoon in Hawaii lined the walls, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the present moment. The potted plants Sarah lovingly tended to seemed to droop, as if they too could sense the end of an era. "We can try counseling," Sarah suggested desperately, her teaching job scheduling notebook falling from her lap as she stood up. "We can work through this, Marcus. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together." But Marcus had already mentally checked out of their marriage. The excitement of his new relationship with Rebecca overshadowed any remaining feelings for Sarah. He had carefully planned this exit, securing a new apartment across town, and gradually moving his essential belongings over the past week while Sarah was at work. "I've made up my mind," he said firmly, picking up his suitcase. "I'll send for the rest of my things later." He reached into his pocket and placed his house key on the coffee table, the metallic sound seeming to echo in the tense silence. Sarah followed him to the door, her steps unsteady. 3 years, she said, her voice breaking. 3 years of marriage, and you're just walking away? We talked about having children, building a life together. Does none of that matter anymore?" Marcus paused at the door, memories flooding back, their first date at the local coffee shop, the nervous proposal in front of her family, their simple but joy-filled wedding. But then Rebecca's face appeared in his mind, her bright smile, and the excitement of their secret romance pushing away the guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, not turning around. "You deserve someone who can love you the way you need to be loved. That's not me anymore." With those words, he opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Sarah's soft sobs followed him down the corridor, but he didn't look back. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Rebecca asking if he'd done it. His fingers quickly typed a response. "It's done. I'm free." As he loaded his suitcase into his car, Marcus noticed Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, watching from her window with disapproval. She had always doted on Sarah, bringing her homemade cookies and sharing gardening tips. He knew by tomorrow, the entire building would know about their separation. Driving away from the apartment complex, Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The security of his marriage was gone, replaced by the thrill of a new beginning with Rebecca. He had already planned to meet her at her place tonight, where she would comfort him and assure him he'd made the right choice. What Marcus didn't know, as he drove toward his new life, was that in their bathroom trash can lay a pregnancy test Sarah had been too nervous to tell them about. She had planned to share the news over a special dinner that weekend, hoping it would bring them closer together. Now, as she curled up on her couch, she placed a hand on her still flat stomach, wondering how she would face this new reality alone. The sun had fully set by the time Marcus reached Rebecca's apartment, leaving behind not just his wife, but a future he had no idea was already taking shape without him. 6 months had passed since Marcus left Sarah, and his life with Rebecca seemed perfect on the surface. Their modern downtown apartment sparkled with new furniture and sleek decorations, all carefully chosen to represent their fresh start together. Every morning, they shared coffee on their balcony, overlooking the city skyline that seemed to promise endless possibilities. Rebecca worked in the same marketing firm as Marcus, making their daily routine seamless. They carpooled to work, shared lunch breaks, and attended office meetings together. Their colleagues had mostly stopped gossiping about their relationship, accepting them as a power couple within the company. One morning, as Marcus prepared for an important client presentation, Rebecca wrapped her arms around him from behind. I'm so glad you chose us, she whispered, fixing his tie in the mirror. We make such a perfect team. Marcus smiled, but something in his reflection caught him off guard. For a moment, he looked just like his father, who had also left his family for another woman. Their life together had fallen into a comfortable pattern. Weekday dinners at trendy restaurants, weekend brunches with Rebecca's friends, and careful avoidance of any places where they might run into Sarah or their old mutual friends. Marcus had even changed his gym membership and grocery store to avoid awkward encounters. But some nights, when Rebecca slept soundly beside him, Marcus would lie awake, his mind wandering to Sarah. He had heard through office gossip that she had quit her teaching job at the elementary school, but nobody seemed to know why or where she had gone. He told himself it was better this way, that a clean break meant fewer complications. Rebecca had big plans for their future. She often talked about marriage, hinting at ring styles she liked and describing her dream wedding. We should start looking at houses in the suburbs, she suggested one evening over wine. Something with a big yard for future possibilities. The comment made Marcus's stomach twist uncomfortably, though he couldn't explain why. Their relationship wasn't without its small tensions. Rebecca didn't like how Marcus still kept a box of old photos in his closet, mostly from his life with Sarah. She had accidentally knocked it over once, scattering pictures across the floor. Marcus had carefully gathered them up and moved the box to a higher shelf, ignoring Rebecca's suggestion to throw them away. At work, their professional dynamic sometimes complicated things. During a major campaign presentation, Rebecca had publicly disagreed with Marcus's strategy, leading to an awkward tension that followed them home. I was just being professional, she had defended herself later. We can't let our relationship affect our work decisions. One Saturday morning, while shopping at a mall across town, Marcus froze in his tracks. He thought he saw Sarah entering a maternity store, but when he looked again, the woman had disappeared into the crowd. Rebecca had noticed his reaction and squeezed his hand tighter. The past is the past, she reminded him firmly. That evening, as they hosted a dinner party for Rebecca's friends, Marcus played the role of the perfect boyfriend. He mixed drinks, told jokes, and charmed everyone with stories about their office romance. But when someone asked how they got together, he carefully edited out the part about his marriage to Sarah. Later that night, as Marcus cleared away wine glasses, he found himself staring at his phone, thumb hovering over Sarah's contact, which he had never deleted. Rebecca's voice startled him back to reality. "Babe, come to bed. Tomorrow's our 6-month anniversary." Marcus quickly pocketed his phone and forced a smile. "Coming," he called back, pushing away the nagging feeling in his chest. He had made his choice, he reminded himself. This was his life now, successful, uncomplicated, and moving forward with Rebecca. What he didn't know was that fate had other plans. In just a few days, his carefully constructed new life would collide with the past he tried so hard to leave behind, in a way he never could have expected. As he climbed into bed beside Rebecca, Marcus had no idea that across town, Sarah was finishing her late-night shift at a new job, her secret growing more visible with each passing day. The upscale Italian restaurant, La Bella Vita, buzzed with evening activity as Marcus and Rebecca celebrated their 6-month anniversary. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, while soft classical music played in the background. Rebecca looked stunning in her new red dress, carefully chosen for this special occasion. "To us," Rebecca raised her wine glass, her eyes sparkling. "And to your promotion." Marcus had just been named Senior Marketing Director, a position that came with a considerable raise. She had helped him prepare for the interviews, and now they were celebrating their shared success. Marcus lifted his glass to meet hers, but the words died in his throat. Through the ambient lighting of the restaurant, he spotted a familiar figure moving between tables. His hand trembled slightly, causing the wine to ripple in his glass. It couldn't be her, he thought. But it was. Sarah, dressed in a neat black waitress uniform, moved efficiently between tables. What caught his attention most was her clearly visible pregnant belly, probably 7 months along. She hadn't noticed them yet, focused on balancing plates and taking orders from other diners. "Marcus, are you okay?" Rebecca's voice seemed distant. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She turned to follow his gaze, and her expression hardened as she recognized Sarah. "Oh," she said flatly, setting down her glass with more force than necessary. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off Sarah. She looked different. Her long brown hair was now cut to shoulder length, and despite the obvious physical changes of pregnancy, she moved with a quiet confidence he hadn't seen before. She seemed focused, determined, and somehow stronger than the crying woman he'd left 6 months ago. "We should leave," Rebecca suggested, already reaching for her purse. But before they could move, Sarah turned and spotted them. The recognition flickered across her face, followed by a brief flash of pain quickly replaced by professional composure. She straightened her shoulders and, to Marcus's shock, walked directly toward their table. "Good evening," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. "I'm Sarah, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you off with any appetizers?" She held her order pad, pen poised, as if they were any other customers. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. His eyes couldn't help but drift to her pregnant belly, his mind racing with calculations. Rebecca cleared her throat loudly, drawing his attention back to the present moment. "We were just leaving," Rebecca announced, standing up. But Marcus remained seated, unable to move, unable to process the scene unfolding before him. "Sarah," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, You're pregnant." The obvious statement hung in the air between them. Sarah's professional smile never wavered. "Yes, I am. Now, about those appetizers, the bruschetta is quite popular." Her hand rested briefly on her belly, a gesture that seemed both protective and proud. Rebecca pulled at Marcus's arm. "We're going," she insisted, her voice sharp with anger and embarrassment. Other diners had begun to notice the tension at their table. "Of course," Sarah said smoothly. "Let me get another server for you." She turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving Marcus staring after her with 1,000 unasked questions spinning in his mind. As they hurriedly left the restaurant, Rebecca berated Marcus for his reaction, but he barely heard her. His thoughts were consumed by what he'd seen. The timing. Could it be? Was it possible that Sarah had been pregnant when he left? The thought made him feel physically ill. "Are you even listening to me?" Rebecca demanded as they reached their car. That was humiliating. She did that on purpose. She must have known we'd be there. But Marcus knew better. The surprise in Sarah's eyes had been genuine, and her composure had been hard-won. She hadn't sought this encounter. Fate had arranged it. That night, lying awake in bed while Rebecca slept, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Sarah, pregnant and independent, serving tables with quiet dignity. He reached for his phone and opened the restaurant's website, noting their hours of operation. He told himself he just wanted to make sure he avoided the place in the future, but deep down, he knew he was already planning his return, alone this time, with questions that needed answers. 3 days after the unexpected encounter at La Bella Vita, Marcus found himself back at the restaurant, this time alone during the lunch rush. He told Rebecca he had a client meeting, but instead, he sat at a corner table, anxiously watching the restaurant staff move about their duties. Sarah wasn't working the lunch shift, but Marcus overheard 2 waitresses talking near the service station. "Sarah's only working evenings now," one said. "Doctor's orders. She needs more rest during the day." The other nodded sympathetically, adding, "Single mom to be, can't be easy." Marcus ordered a coffee and stayed longer than necessary, gathering bits of information from the staff's casual conversations. He learned that Sarah had started working at the restaurant 4 months ago, never mentioning her past or the baby's father. She'd quickly become a favorite among both staff and regular customers, known for her warm smile and quiet determination. The following evening, he returned, choosing a different table. This time, Sarah was working, but another server was assigned to his section. He watched as she skillfully managed her tables, occasionally resting a hand on her lower back when she thought nobody was looking. During a quiet moment, Marcus approached Tony, the elderly bartender who seemed to know everyone's story. "Sarah's quite impressive," Marcus commented casually, sliding onto a bar stool. "Handling all this while pregnant." Tony wiped a glass, studying Marcus with knowing eyes. "She's a fighter, that one. Came in here desperate for work after leaving her teaching job. Something about needing better health insurance for the baby." He paused, then added, "Funny thing is, she found out about the pregnancy right after her husband left her for another woman. Real piece of work, that guy." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He gripped his water glass tightly, the ice cubes clinking against the sides. Did she ever try to tell him?" he managed to ask. Nah, Tony replied, shaking his head. Said he'd made his choice clear. She's got too much pride to chase after someone who didn't want her. The bartender moved away to serve another customer, leaving Marcus with his thoughts. Over the next week, Marcus became a regular at La Bella Vita, gathering more pieces of the puzzle. From Maria, a motherly waitress who had taken Sarah under her wing, he learned that Sarah had been too sick with morning sickness to keep teaching. From the hostess, he discovered that Sarah was living in a small apartment near the restaurant, having sold her car to cover medical expenses. Each new detail twisted the knife of guilt deeper. One evening, he overheard Sarah talking to another server about her latest doctor's appointment. It's a boy, she said softly, her hand resting on her belly. Everything's healthy and normal. The joy in her voice was mixed with a hint of sadness that Marcus recognized all too well. Rebecca had grown suspicious of his frequent absences. You've been distracted ever since we saw her, she accused one night. Are you still in love with her? Marcus couldn't answer, realizing he wasn't sure anymore about anything. Finally, after 10 days of observation, Marcus arrived at the restaurant just as Sarah was finishing her shift. He watched through the window as she counted her tips at the bar, chatting with Tommy. She looked tired but peaceful, as if she found her own kind of happiness in this new life. A young busboy helped Sarah with her coat, and she thanked him with a warm smile. Marcus remembered how she used to smile at him that way, before everything fell apart. As she gathered her things to leave, he noticed she was wearing her mother's old silver necklace, the one she only wore when she needed extra strength. The truth had fully unraveled before him. Sarah had faced pregnancy alone, rebuilt her life from scratch, and found dignity in hard work, all while carrying his child. She hadn't tried to trap him, hadn't used the baby to win him back, hadn't even told him he was going to be a father. She'd simply moved forward, protecting both herself and their unborn son from more hurt. Marcus sat in his car, watching Sarah walk carefully to the bus stop. Tomorrow, he would have to make a decision. But tonight, the weight of his choices and their consequences pressed heavily on his shoulders, keeping him rooted to the spot long after Sarah's bus had disappeared into the night. Marcus sat in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. The quarterly marketing reports that usually consumed his attention now seemed meaningless. His mind kept drifting to Sarah, to their unborn child, and to the life he walked away from without knowing the full story. Rebecca knocked on his door, entering with a stack of papers. The client meeting starts in 10 minutes, she reminded him. She paused, noticing his distraction. You're thinking about her again, aren't you? Her voice carried an edge of frustration. I can't focus, Marcus admitted, running his hands through his hair. The past 2 weeks since discovering Sarah's pregnancy had turned his world upside down. His nights were sleepless, filled with memories and what-ifs. Even his morning coffee ritual with Rebecca on their balcony had lost its charm. During lunch, instead of joining Rebecca and their colleagues, Marcus drove to a park near their old apartment. He sat on a bench where he and Sarah used to spend Sunday afternoons, planning their future. They had talked about children then. He had always said someday, not realizing someday had already arrived. His phone buzzed with messages from Rebecca throughout the day. Where are you? We need to talk about this. You can't keep avoiding me. But Marcus couldn't bring himself to respond. Instead, he found himself driving to La Bella Vita again, sitting at the bar, watching Sarah work. She moved differently now, more carefully as her pregnancy progressed. Sometimes she would pause, one hand on her back, the other cradling her belly, and the sight made his heart ache. One evening, Rebecca followed him to the restaurant. She found him at his usual spot at the bar, watching Sarah from a distance. This has to stop, Rebecca demanded, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. You're obsessed. We had plans, Marcus. A future together. Marcus turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time in weeks. Rebecca was beautiful, successful, everything he thought he wanted. But now all he could see was what he'd thrown away, the genuine love he'd shared with Sarah, the family they created, the trust he'd broken. I'm going to be a father, he said quietly, the words finally spoken aloud making them more real. That's my child she's carrying. Rebecca's face hardened. A child she didn't even tell you about. She made her choice, Marcus, just like you made yours when you chose me. She grabbed her purse and left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. At home that night, Marcus found himself looking through the box of old photos he'd kept hidden away. There was Sarah on their wedding day, her eyes bright with happiness. Another showed them painting their first apartment, both covered in splashes of blue paint. The memories flooded back, her laugh, the way she'd bring him coffee in bed, how she'd always known when he needed quiet support. Rebecca waited up for him, sitting in their darkened living room. "We need to decide what we're doing," she said. "I can't keep watching you torture yourself over her. Either we move forward together, or—" She left the sentence unfinished. Marcus stared out their apartment window at the city lights. "I don't know who I am anymore," he confessed. "Everything I thought I wanted seems different now." That night, he slept on the couch, his dreams filled with images of Sarah, of a baby he hadn't met, of a life he'd abandoned. He woke early, before Rebecca, and found himself writing everything he wanted to say to Sarah: apologies, questions, regrets. But he couldn't bring himself to actually approach her at the restaurant. Tony, the bartender who'd become an unwitting confidant, watched Marcus's internal struggle with wise eyes. "Sometimes," he said one evening, wiping down the bar, "the hardest person to forgive is yourself." The words stayed with Marcus as he drove home, past his old neighborhood, past the school where Sarah used to teach, past all the places that held memories of their life together. He had to make a choice, but this time he needed to choose with his heart fully aware of what was at stake. It was a quiet Tuesday evening at La Bella Vita when everything finally came to a head. Marcus sat at his usual spot at the bar, nursing a glass of water, when Sarah approached him directly for the first time since their initial encounter. "We need to talk," she said firmly, her voice low but determined. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. Wait for me outside." She didn't wait for his response. Turning away to continue her work, one hand automatically moving to support her lower back. Marcus spent those 20 minutes pacing the parking lot, his heart racing. The evening air was cool, and distant thunder suggested an approaching storm. When Sarah emerged from the restaurant's side door, she looked tired but resolute. "You need to stop coming here," she began, standing a careful distance away from him. "The other servers are talking, and I can't have this kind of drama at work. I need this job." "Sarah, I know about the baby," Marcus blurted out. "I know you found out right after I left. Why didn't you tell me?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Tell you? You were too busy starting your new life with Rebecca to even look back. Besides, you made it clear you wanted space. Well, congratulations, you got it." Lightning flashed in the distance as Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "You know what's funny? I had it all planned out. I was going to tell you over dinner that weekend. I'd even bought a little pair of baby shoes to surprise you with." She reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny box, tossing it to him. "Here, I kept them as a reminder." Marcus opened the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a pair of white baby sneakers, so small they fit in his palm. "I had a right to know," he said softly. "A right?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "What about my right to be treated with respect? My right to a faithful husband? You were sleeping with Rebecca for months before you left. Don't think I didn't know." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Neither of them moved to seek shelter. "I spent 6 months rebuilding my life," Sarah continued, raindrops mixing with tears on her face. "I sold my car to pay medical bills. I work double shifts when I can. I'm taking online classes in business management. I'm doing everything I can to provide for this baby on my own." "Let me help," Marcus pleaded. "It's my child, too." "Now you want to help?" Sarah's voice rose. "Where were you during the morning sickness?" "During the first ultrasound. When I had to move out of our apartment because I couldn't afford it alone. When I had to explain to my students why their teacher was leaving mid-year." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both jump. Sarah instinctively wrapped her arms around her belly, the gesture making Marcus's heart ache. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "Terrible ones. But please, don't punish our child because of what I did." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting us both. This baby will know love and stability. I won't let him grow up watching his father's divided loyalty, wondering if he'll leave again when things get tough." A car pulled into the parking lot, its headlights illuminating them briefly. It was Tony, the bartender, checking if Sarah was okay. She waved him off with a reassuring nod. "I don't need your money," Sarah said firmly. I don't need your guilt, and I definitely don't need your pity. What I need is to focus on my child without wondering when you'll decide to disappear again. Marcus stood in the rain, clutching the tiny box with the baby shoes, watching as Sarah walked toward her bus stop. Before she got too far, she turned back one last time. The baby's due in 10 weeks, she said. I'm having a boy. If you really want to be part of his life, prove it. Not by stalking me at work, not by trying to ease your conscience, but by showing me you can be the kind of father he deserves. With those words, she left him standing alone in the rain, holding a pair of unworn baby shoes and the weight of his choices. The confrontation with Sarah changed everything for Marcus. He returned home that night, soaked from the rain and carrying the small box with baby shoes, to find Rebecca waiting up for him. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. You're going to leave me for her, aren't you? Rebecca asked, her voice surprisingly calm. She sat perfectly still on their designer couch, looking more resigned than angry. Marcus placed the tiny box on their coffee table and sank into a chair. It's not about leaving for her, he said quietly. It's about becoming someone I can live with. Someone my son can be proud of. The word son hung in the air between them. Rebecca stared at the small box, then picked it up and opened it. Her fingers traced the tiny white sneakers inside. I knew, she said softly. The moment we saw her at the restaurant, I could see it in your eyes. Everything changed. Over the next few days, their relationship unraveled with surprising gentleness. Rebecca packed her things methodically, leaving behind the furniture they'd chosen together. I won't be the other woman anymore, she explained. I won't be the reason a child grows up without his father. At work, Marcus requested a transfer to a different department. His boss, understanding the situation, approved it immediately. The office gossip buzzed for a while, but Marcus no longer cared about appearances. He spent his evenings making plans, researching everything about pregnancy and newborns. His coffee table, once covered with marketing reports, now held books about parenting and child development. He started attending parenting classes alone, being the only single father to be in the room. One morning, Marcus visited his own father, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. The old man lived alone, surrounded by regrets and photographs of the family he'd abandoned. I thought I was choosing happiness, his father said, looking aged and tired. Instead, I chose loneliness. Marcus took concrete steps to prove his commitment. He found an apartment in Sarah's neighborhood, close enough to be available, but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. He opened a savings account for the baby and started depositing money regularly. He even enrolled in counseling to understand his past choices and ensure he wouldn't repeat his father's pattern. Rebecca moved out on a Sunday. As she handed back her key, she paused at the door. You know what's ironic, she said. I always wanted to be someone's first choice. I thought I finally was with you, but you were never really mine to keep, were you? That evening, Marcus sat alone in his half-empty apartment, looking at old wedding photos of him and Sarah. He remembered the promises he'd made, the future they'd planned, the love they'd shared. He'd thrown it all away for what he thought was passion, only to discover that true love had been there all along. He wrote Sarah a letter, not asking for reconciliation but expressing his commitment to their child. He detailed the changes he was making, the steps he was taking to become a better man. He left it with Tony at the restaurant, along with copies of his parenting class certificates and the lease for his new apartment. Days passed without response. Marcus continued his preparations for fatherhood, turning one of his new bedrooms into a nursery. He chose neutral colors, remembering how Sarah had once mentioned she liked them. Every purchase, from the crib to the smallest onsi, felt like both an act of hope and an apology. Finally, after 2 weeks, he received a text from Sarah. Doctor's appointment tomorrow at 2 p.m. St. Mary's Hospital. If you're serious about being involved, you can start by being there. Marcus stared at the message for a long time, tears blurring his vision. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a chance to be present for his child, to prove his worth as a father, to show Sarah that people could change. That night, he lay in his bed alone, thinking about how one moment of selfishness had nearly cost him everything that truly mattered. Tomorrow would be the first step on a long journey of redemption, and for the first time in months, he felt ready to walk that path, no matter how difficult it might be. The maternity ward at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with activity as Sarah's contractions grew closer together. It was 2 weeks before her due date, but their son had decided to make an early appearance. Marcus paced the hallway outside her room, respecting her wishes to have her mother with her during the actual delivery. The past 8 weeks have been a journey of small steps and careful progress. After that first doctor's appointment, Sarah had gradually allowed Marcus to be more involved. He'd attended every subsequent checkup, helped set up her new apartment's nursery, and even driven her to work on days when she felt too tired to take the bus. "She's asking for you." Sarah's mother appeared at the door, her face stern but softening slightly. She'd been the hardest to win over, remembering how broken her daughter had been after Marcus left. But even she had seen the changes in him over the past weeks. Inside the delivery room, Sarah lay breathing heavily through contractions. Without thinking, Marcus moved to her side, offering his hand. To his surprise, she took it, squeezing hard as another contraction hit. "I'm scared," she whispered, showing vulnerability for the first time in months. "I'm right here," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical terms, encouragement from nurses, and Sarah's determined efforts. Finally, at 3:47 a.m., their son entered the world with a strong cry that filled the room. "Would you like to cut the cord?" the doctor asked Marcus. With trembling hands, he performed this first act of fatherhood, tears streaming down his face as he watched the nurses clean and weigh his son. When they placed the baby in Sarah's arms, both parents gasped. He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a head full of dark hair like his mother's. Sarah looked up at Marcus, her eyes full of mixed emotions. "He needs a name," she said softly. "What about Nathan?" Marcus suggested. "It means gift." They had discussed names during the prenatal visits, but never settled on one. Sarah looked down at their son, testing the name. "Nathan," she repeated. "Nathan James." She added Marcus's middle name without hesitation, a peace offering that made his heart swell. As the sun rose over the city, Marcus sat in a chair beside Sarah's bed, holding Nathan while she slept. He marveled at how such a tiny being could change everything. The baby shoes he'd carried in his pocket for weeks now seemed huge compared to his son's actual feet. When Sarah woke, she watched them quietly for a moment. "I never told you why I finally let you back in," she said. Marcus looked up, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "It wasn't the letters, or the new apartment, or even the parenting classes," she continued. "It was when Tony told me you visited your father. He said you came back to the bar that night and said you finally understood what you never wanted to become." Marcus nodded, remembering that difficult visit. "I saw my future in him, alone, full of regrets, missing all the important moments. I couldn't let that happen with Nathan." Sarah adjusted herself in the bed, wincing slightly. "We're not getting back together," she said firmly. "Too much has happened." "I know," Marcus replied, "but we can be good parents together. That's what matters now." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Nathan opened his eyes, looking up at his father with unfocused curiosity. Sarah smiled, her first genuine smile directed at Marcus since before he'd left. "We'll figure it out," she said. Day by day. A nurse entered with discharge papers and instructions. As Sarah prepared to leave, Marcus carefully placed Nathan in his car seat, the one they'd chosen together at the baby store. The tiny white sneakers that had started his journey to redemption now hung from the handle, a reminder of how close he'd come to missing all of this. Outside the hospital, Marcus carried the car seat while Sarah's mother helped her walk. They weren't a conventional family, and their path forward wouldn't be easy. But as they stood together in the morning sunlight, watching Nathan sleep peacefully, they shared a moment of understanding. Sometimes broken things couldn't be fixed, but they could be rebuilt into something new, something different but equally meaningful. Nathan's soft coo brought smiles to all their faces. This was their new beginning, not as husband and wife, but as mother and father, united in their love for the tiny gift they created together.